nutrients and from our food system, and it wastes all of our money, household money, municipality. It's about $2,000. I think actually, in my wasted food facts, the average US family throws about $1,800 per year of food. Now with inflation, we probably would look at that as over $2,000 a year of food that we waste. And that the majority of food waste occurs at home. We like to think that it might be a commercial. We think the grocery store wastes a lot of food. We think schools, but actually the majority of wasted food happens in residential and household food. The issue of food date labeling ends up with a lot of food going into the trash. And simply because some people actually manage their pantries and their refrigerators by simply looking at those dates that have been printed, which actually don't mean that you need to throw it out. It just is an arbitrary, often manufacturing, it's driven by the producer who says on this day, it doesn't taste as good as it did the day before. So totally arbitrary, except in the case of baby formula and some fresh meat and seafood products. And anyway, it leads to a lot of waste. The majority, we do know from research that the majority of wasted food is actually good and edible food. So that makes it a shame. Fruits and vegetables, the nutritious part of our diets, are actually generally the largest segment of household food waste. And that the surplus food from retail and consumers, this is according to the EPA, is sufficient to feed a far greater number than estimated by the USDA to be food insecure, which is just the official way of saying, that if I think on a global scale that we produce 2.5 times more food than it would take to feed everyone on the planet. And yet we have millions that are going hungry. So waste food is our problem in Maine, but it is a bigger problem. In the state of Maine, we have we just did a study to measure 361,000 tons of food annually. If you make that, equivalent to retail dollars, 1.8 billion at retail. Like we said, the higher food prices, this food waste leads to higher food prices because causing some scarcity and also, allowing retailers to sort of mark up items, but it means that we have to shop more often. So we have more frequent shopping trips. And so the costs of food waste are high. Higher labor costs make food waste a costlier problem. So as labor costs increase, we know that the price of food is going up, and therefore throwing it away makes it a more expensive problem. Increasing disposal costs, landfills are filling up, tipping rates are going up. So getting rid of that food waste also is more expensive. And overall, this wastefulness, as in any system, when you're wasting the resource, the costs are going to go up. It's a societal problem, like I've talked about, because we, while many go hungry, we're wasting food. Food as medicine is a whole new area of research about how much of our diseases are actually caused by improper nutrition, and that may be the most essential part of any medicine type of program or any health program is making sure that good nutritious food is being eaten. So food waste sort of is a direct opposite of that. And we also know it's a societal issue because the majority of food waste happens in developed countries like the US, while poorer countries actually are still lacking food and doing everything they can to not waste their food. So it becomes a food justice issue. We also, since we're using the world as a global sourcing area for food, we are literally taking food from people who don't have enough to bring it here to the United States, where we're adding it to our waste stream. So, and that happens again on a global basis, but it happens probably on a statewide basis. It just follows common sense that when you have too much, you become more wasteful, I guess. And when you have less, you pay more attention to it. So the issue of food waste for climate mitigation is becoming something that we know a lot more about now. Project Drawdown, which is also a research center focused on climate change, has been talking about food waste as long as we've been working on it. So I would say, at least, 5-10 years. They have always identified it as, sometimes the number one of the top things that households and individuals can do to fight climate change. But it's increasingly now being recognized more broadly that food waste, because if you think about the whole food system that has to do work to actually produce food that we then waste, the impact, the methane, the greenhouse gases produced are, that data is changing. And now food waste is seen to be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter. If food waste were a country, the third largest emitter after the US and China. And the climate impact of US food waste is equal to driving 50 million cars for a year and greater than the airline industry. And so it's got a big link to climate impact, but on even a more local basis, food going into the landfills produces a leachate that then threatens our water quality. And, testing in our state has shown that the areas surrounding the landfills is actually being impacted by the leachate. And, for the piece of our waste system that gets burned, incineration really is also not a good way to deal with food. Food is not really meant to be burnt, and there's impact on air quality. So it's a climate problem. So I stole the slide from our climate action plan group, just because I thought it was such a good way to sort of list the impact of food loss and waste, in terms of all sorts of environmental measures. It wastes 140 million acres of agricultural land. It wastes, fresh water, pesticides that have to be used to produce food that we waste, fertilizer, and the greenhouse gases produced. Every year, food loss and waste, the numbers are slightly different, 218 billion, talks about the food insecurity impact. But here is where we have the climate impact of US food waste, equivalent to driving 50 million gas-powered vehicles for a year. Its carbon footprint in 2017 was 9.3 billion tons of CO2e emissions, roughly the same as the total greenhouse gases generated by the US and the EU combined. So, this year was the first year that recommendations for food waste are now being looked at to be added to our climate action plan. So this connection between food loss and waste and the climate is relatively new science and new data, and it's very concerning. And so we are taking action here and all across the country. States are looking at the same thing. One of the big actions that we took in our state, and we're very proud of this, that, to actually get serious about food loss and waste, the first thing you need to do is to get the actual data for your state. For many years now, there are organizations like ReFed and even the EPA to some degree had data that they could share that was really modeled data. So you could look up data for Maine about food waste, but it wasn't based on what was actually happening here in the state. It was based on our population size, the size of our industries, and, based on, sort of these generalized models. But this year, for the first time, the DEP was able to issue an RFP for a food loss and waste generation study across 15 sectors. So that we could finally have some real data based on what was happening actually in our state with regard to food loss and waste. And so I just wanted to share with you today some of those key findings so that, it really grounds. When I talk to you about solutions, it's good to start with, okay, but where are we today? So the study showed us that across the sectors reviewed, 15 sectors, 361,000 approximately tons of food loss and waste are generated each year in Maine. According to the study, residential and agricultural sectors were the most significant contributors. Now, I highlighted this one because it's been a little bit misunderstood. The residential sector is actually the largest single producing sector at about 36% of the total is created by households. So if anybody wants to understand who of those 15 large sectors is generating the most food waste, it's actually households. And the household food waste is problematic because that is primarily going into the waste stream into landfills, down the drain, incinerated, which are all not good solutions. The agricultural sector actually makes up a quarter only of the total food waste. But the thing that needs to be understood is that the agriculture, our farms are not taking their crops to the landfill. They're not incinerating the crops. So while it is technically food loss because it's food that could be eaten, and so we did measure it, it is not really, it's not an area of focus. It's something that we need to get that food so that it can be eaten by people, but it's not the, disastrous situation where it's going into the landfill. So in this key findings in the reports, it seems that it's overstated. And the important thing to know is that it's the households that generate the majority of the food waste. And commercial businesses, the next bullet point, well, what they did here is they combined all the commercial business sectors. So while it seems bigger than household at 37%, they're adding up manufacturing, grocery, and all the hospitals, like every commercial sector. And so that makes up a greater piece. But if you look at the 15 sectors, again, the important thing to know is households are creating the most. Another interesting way to look at where action needs to be taken is the food manufacturing sector has fewer players that are making up 11% of the total. So if you're trying to understand what single entities are generating a lot of this food waste and loss, that's another chart that you can find in the report. And so by that measure, food manufacturing entities, while they're only 11% of total, there's only 431 of them. And so there is a lot of waste being generated. But in many cases, it's byproducts that could have a lot of economic potential if made into other food items. So the news isn't all bad, but again, it's a good way to understand the study. And that the last bullet point is sort of obvious, commercial food loss and waste are most prevalent in Cumberland and York counties. It's the southern part of Maine because that's where we have the most density of both population and businesses. So, but I just thought it was important to go. That is taken directly from the study, and here's another snapshot I took from the study, just so you could see that there is data there by county. So we have food loss and waste in total for every county. And we also have it, you can see here, by the different sectors. And that's what I was saying. If you look, the number one is residences at 129,000 tons, and that farms and commercial are actually smaller at 90. And so I'm not sure exactly why they decided to total them up together and make them the large sector. But anyway, here the actual numbers across, and I only took the first top 6 or 8 sectors, but there's actually 15. This I thought was another good pullout from the study, which shows, I don't know if it's not really important that you see it other than to kind of understand that you could go back to the study and take a look at it. But this shows by county the amount of food waste being produced, and the darkest is the most amount, so the lightest is less than 1,000 tons, and then, going up from there. But it also shows the processing infrastructure. So the little dots on the map show either compost facilities or anaerobic digestion facilities and where they're located. And then the circles are the 25-mile radius. So very often in this legislation for food waste bans and things like that, they'll talk about, what kind of processing capabilities does a food waste generator have within 20 or 25 miles of the business. So this map is pretty good to give you an idea of, do we really have capacity to do something about the tonnage of food waste, that's located close to where the food waste is being produced. And, by every measure, we have a lot of opportunity to increase the processing in our state to actually match up with the amount being produced. So, but again, you can find these. It's not intended that you can see and everything, but I just wanted to give you kind of a flavor for the type of data that was being collected in the study. And then the question is, okay, so now you have all this good data, 15 sectors, every county in Maine, the tonnage per year, and then what was recommended. So one of the big things is that not only does our state have this food loss and waste generation study, which is really an important first step, but there is also a companion study that's being completed right now where we take a look at this food loss and waste and characterize it. There's a little bit of that work in the study where we talk about how much is edible of the food waste, how much is inedible, how much could be eaten by livestock, by people, how much of it is available for composting, how much of it is avoidable. You know, in processing, we said that food processors might produce a lot of food loss and waste, but that is unavoidable because it's just a byproduct of that manufacturing process, where there's a lot of food waste in the state that's avoidable. And that's the residential, where, you know, you aren't forced to throw away that much food. If you bought too much food, if you cooked too much food, you know, that kind of waste is avoidable. You can plan better, you can shop better, you can store your food better so that it doesn't go to waste. So this food waste characterization study that's being done now, and Mark can probably answer more questions with regard to that since it's a DEP study, but that will really be helpful to give us a better idea of what solutions for food waste make the most sense, because we'll have a better understanding of the 361,000 tons, you know, if most of it's edible, then the problem is just how to get it to people. If a good portion is inedible, then how to get it to be composted and things like that. And it'll give us an idea of how much capacity do we need for each solution to be able to address what's happening in the state. But from this first study, there were some proposed food waste actions or solutions. Number one, to increase the education. You know, we have found over and over again with our research that you can give communities, you can give people solutions for food, you can give them the tools, but if they don't understand that food waste is a problem, and I think that maybe one of the simplest reasons that food waste is a problem in education is that people think that food comes from nature, especially fruits and vegetables. And if you just throw it away, it's not really a problem because it just goes back to nature, right? It just, you know, disintegrates. And so how can food waste be a problem? It just goes, you know, it's not like throwing away plastic. But people don't really understand that where trash goes is the landfill or incineration. And neither of those are, food was never designed to be burned, and food wasn't designed to be put into a landfill, which was created for dry waste. So this methane gas production that comes about because of putting it in the landfill. So it does take education, and I'm not suggesting that we get into all the nitty-gritty details, but to let people know that it's a problem, and it's a problem linked to hunger, it's a problem linked to climate change, and it's something that is very easy for individuals to take action on. So that kind of education is important no matter what types of other solutions we do. But something else that was proposed is to really analyze the economic impact of food waste, because once we really can see how much it's costing our companies, our communities in terms of the food waste, we don't really have those numbers. People are spending, communities, municipalities are spending money on food waste disposal, but not really understanding what are the, you know, how much money could you be saving if you were to reduce that. So to understand the economic impact of these food byproduct streams that are coming out of manufacturing, you know, how much is that costing the companies? And if they could monetize some of those food waste streams, how could that, you know, help them? So to really understand, because of course, when money is at stake, that's how you get people to pay attention and to take action. So it was really recommended that we do more to analyze the economics of food waste. Oops, I'm sorry about my numbering there. Number 3 is to develop social impact strategies. We know that we have hungry people in our state, and we know, even from this study, that there is a good portion of food that's getting wasted that's good and edible. So we are already working on a research project at the Mitchell Center to understand what is the gap and how can we get more of that food that's being now thrown out to be donated instead when it is good and edible, and before it becomes something that you have to compost. How can we get more of that good food to feeding people? And here's where the agricultural sector might be important, because if there is good food still in the fields, how can we create incentives for and support for the farmers to pick all that food so that we can get it into the charitable food system? So we're developing social impact strategies, environmental impact strategies. We are looking at a methane reduction plan linked to food waste and trying to understand what parts of this food waste problem can we really work on that will have the most impact on the methane reduction side. So that is something that's coming out of that study. We also, important to know, of this 361,000 tons that is labeled as food loss and waste, there is a portion of that that is already being diverted, that is already being managed. So while we have grocery food loss and waste evaluated there, it doesn't recognize that, for instance, a Hannaford would already be donating and diverting all their food waste away from the landfill. So it doesn't recognize ongoing diversion, just to sort of see what is the problem. So that's something where we might have some recognition programs to create incentives for more businesses, for more communities to do the right thing by recognizing the impact of diversion initiatives. Gathering more data, it's always good. Like, we have this as a start, but this is just 1 year. So it's nice that I can talk to you in 2024 about food waste, but what about 2025 and 2026? As changes start happening, we need to have sector-based surveys so we can keep that data up to date, or working groups that are collecting data around the food waste issue. And then finally, what we found in our study, especially working with the commercial and the food processors, is there's a huge economic benefit opportunity to creating value-added or upcycled products, because we've already seen companies like a Maine Grains or a Bristol Seafood who've almost gotten their waste streams to zero, because they have upcycled, they've created products out of what might have been in the past waste. So a seafood company can figure out how to not only sell their primary product, which is fish fillets, but also the food that's left on the bones can be used for pet food products. And then, even in the case of Bristol, they were using the skin of the fish to sell it as a collagen into the beauty market, which was quite a value-added product. Maine Grains is the same thing. Amber Lamke tells terrific stories about all these things that are byproducts of the milling process that in the past might have been waste, that they have figured out how to actually monetize and create products that are revenue streams for them. So we're very excited, that the state paid attention to some of this data as actually an economic opportunity for new businesses to develop. So those are the actions that were recommended from the study, but you can find, it's like a 53-page study. The link is on the DEP website. It's also available on our Food Rescue Maine website. So, but why, take action now? Why is it so important to do something about food waste? Why did the state undertake the study? Well, the big reason, is that hunger and climate change are major growing challenges negatively impacting our state. So it's imperative, and both of them have deadlines, by 2030. This happens to be that we are supposed to reduce our food waste by 50% by 2030, which is also, we have an ending hunger initiative by 2030. In terms of climate impact, as I said, they're really starting to look at, instead of at 100-year timeline for solutions, starting to look to 20 years. So it's imperative that we take action now. And the great thing is, and MRA represents a whole group that has an array of simple, cost-effective solutions that are available now. So that's why I'm talking to you here today. And the good news is that, I guess, in concert with our communities, we and the DEP have been looking at a range of solutions. So our real goal is to work with stakeholders, to work with communities, businesses, to do pilot solutions. So we test out what we think could be great ways to reduce or end food waste in our state. And we will test them with one community or a few communities. We'll test with 4 schools. And then once we get the data and the learning, the idea, and that's why you can visit our website, we post these pilot solutions. And then the hope is that more communities in Maine can learn, can see what we did, can see the results, and can call on us to help you, call on the DEP to help you, but try to expand that work. So just so you know that all of the solutions that we test have triple bottom line goals. So the only types of solutions we're interested in are ones that are economically sound. So there's a profit opportunity there. There's a people opportunity to improve people's welfare, and then a planet opportunity. So it has to do, we can't just try to help people and the planet, but not be able to pay for it. And we can't find profitable opportunities that really aren't in the best interest of people and the planet. So it has to all go together. We use collaborations in our solutions. So this is just a list. I mean, we have probably 100 different organizations and communities and companies that we have been working with on these food waste solutions for the last 5 years. We follow the Maine food waste solution hierarchy. So this is an important and sometimes overlooked. Sometimes people feel like if they have a composting solution, that they've really taken care of the food waste issue in their community or in their home. But really, if you look at composting in purple, it's towards the bottom. It's a good solution, better definitely than disposal, but not as good as our number 1, which is reduce unwanted food waste, or number 2, recovering it to feed people, feed animals. So recycling is good, but the reason why reducing is better, of course, is that if you don't create the surplus food in the first place, all of your costs go down. The cost for the fresh water, the cost of the energy, it leaves more food on the shelves for other people. So it creates less stress on the food system. So reduction is always the first goal. And we're always in our solutions trying to move up the hierarchy to get to reduction solutions versus recycling solutions. We think that recycling needs to be there in case you missed the opportunity to reduce and you missed the opportunity to recover the food, so that you don't have to go to disposal. But definitely the biggest opportunity for our state is to focus more on reduction and recovery. And then, out of those general goals, these are the 6 things that our group at the Mitchell Center is working with our partners on. We have solution 1, we do a number of food waste tracking and measuring studies. So again, to get the data, we've worked with the Department of Corrections on each one of the facilities to track and measure waste so that we could come up with solutions to reduce it. We've worked with restaurants and hotels, and now we're working with hospital, with Northern Light Health on doing the same in the hospital system. So solution 2 is that goal of trying to get food to feed more people. So we've done some pilots on creating food rescue systems, different ways of rescuing food throughout the state. Solution 3, it's not necessarily in the order of importance because we had talked about education probably being the most important, but our solution 3 is education, in which we have a website, we have social media, and we actually go out and do these types of presentations and events all throughout the state to educate Maine consumers. Solution 4 is that opportunity to build Maine's food processing infrastructure so that instead of surplus food being wasted, this might pertain to, fruits and vegetables that are seconds, or they don't, those ugly fruits and vegetables, they call them. But if we had more processing capability to can and things like that, or to make different food products, then we would be able to utilize those. Solution 5, increase food donation. And solution 6 is try to divert food waste away from the landfills. So that's really composting and anaerobic digestion. So those are the solutions that we're primarily working on, and we get calls all the time and are happy to answer any questions about these solutions, what might work best in your particular case, what the solutions mean. But here are just some, and I just to go over, the exact work. So solution one, I said, is the tracking and measuring. So we had a team go in to each one of the Department of Corrections kitchens, and we did, and this is just a little snapshot of the tracking list that we have, proteins, grains, how much, the reason for the loss. And so by doing just this simple tracking, and usually these studies are about 2 months, and it becomes very simple. It's just a paper and pencil thing to measure each day the amount of waste and loss. And by doing that, we can then come up with solutions. I mean, some really great work that we were able to do with Department of Corrections during the pandemic, since they were one of the only large food service organizations that was still in operation during the pandemic. But really do some work to both reduce the amount of money being spent in the program, but also to improve the food quality in the program, because, it's not always just about cutting costs, but sometimes food is going to waste, and that waste of money can actually be used to improve the quality of the food that you're procuring. So we were able to do a lot, and we're just embarking on the study with Northern Light Health, but it's the same opportunity, tracking. Theirs is a very complicated food service organization because they serve patients in the room. They also have public dining spaces. And so how to manage that, again, to sort of improve the overall quality of their operation. So we're really excited about that work. I guess, these are some, we already did a small study with their Blue Hill Hospital, and right now we're working with Eastern Maine Medical Center. We also did a food waste tracking study for at home. We said that households were the biggest place of waste. So we thought it was important to try to get households to reduce their waste. In order to get participation by households, we thought that we would try it as an online. So we started it in January of 2022 or 3. I'm trying to remember now. What times get, so we did it a couple of years ago, and we invited the whole state. We worked with libraries throughout the state to sign up residents to go online and for 4 weeks to try to reduce their food waste. So each week they would send to us we gave them some simple ways to measure how much food was being wasted in their household. And then based on what they saw, like, was it bread, was it proteins, what were they wasting, we would give them tips on how to reduce the waste. And by the end of it, we saw that with all the households that we were working with, we were able to get reductions of, over 18% just in the 4 weeks, just by trying some of these practices. And it definitely made people aware. I mean, if you did this at home in your home for just a day or two, set aside the food not going into the trash to see what types of food you most commonly throw away, it would really help your shopping practices. It would really help your food storage practices. You would just be much more aware. So we feel like this was a really successful direction to try to help households reduce their waste. And these are some of the tips that we shared. If you plan better, if you organize your refrigerator, if you shop with a list, if you have better storage habits, you also waste less. Remember that the freezer is your friend is a huge storage tip. That, don't wait for the berries to go bad. Just stick the whole box in the freezer and rinse it and use it later on. It'll still be perfect, and it won't go to mold. And cooking creatively also is a great strategy for wasting less. And there's a Super Cook website that we always like to promote that lets you put in any ingredients that you have, any random ingredients that you have to use up that might be going bad, and it'll give you recipes on what to do with them. So that's household food waste. In terms of increasing food rescue and donation, we look for a lot of opportunities here. What we've done, this was a project in Biddeford. We've also done some work in Machias community. We've done some work actually in Orono at the University of Maine to try to get food that would otherwise be wasted to get to people who need it. And we had another pilot in Rockland. So we've tried this work all over the state, different types of strategies, but the idea is just from taking food that's in surplus, perfectly good, beautiful food that's in surplus in one place, very often restaurants or food service kitchens, and getting it to another kitchen where people who would like to eat it are being served. So sometimes soup kitchens, sometimes community suppers. And, you know, at Orono, we have a community fridge, which is one way. So food from the cafeteria there can get boxed up into, and all that food that you see in that refrigerator is free. And we want people to take it because it would otherwise go to waste. You can imagine we never have a problem with any of that food going to waste and always gets eaten. So these models, it's a community supper that we started with the Machias community that, again, sometimes surplus goes to the pantry, but it's the type of surplus that might not stay around for long. So by having a weekly community supper, you can take all that food that otherwise you might have to ultimately compost it, but it's still good and edible. And if you schedule this weekly supper, you put everything, it can be cooked into some delicious dishes that the whole community can enjoy. So it's a great strategy. In terms of education, as I said, we have worked a lot on our website. We've worked a lot on community programs, social media. We do elementary school education programs that have been very effective, and we're about to launch 4 new schools. We're working up in Aroostook County with Easton. We are working with Lisbon again. We have Auburn, and the last one is South Portland. So we try to get different school sizes, different locations, but we'll do another elementary school program. This is our social media. So we have a student who's just dedicated to doing TikTok videos and Instagram with ideas on how to stop food waste. Here's our TikTok. So you can find all this. It's all linked to the website. In terms of upcycling, we have worked with farms in the state to try to, we did a hot sheet, which is sort of an opportunity buying farms that have surplus in certain foods. How much do they have of it? What price, what sort of sale price would they be willing to sell it for a bulk purchase? And so we were, again, in this way, trying to connect surplus, good, edible, fresh, local food with institutional buyers who would like to have that good local food, but might not know that it's available at these attractive prices. So a student was working with the farms to coordinate that test. We also had a graduate student working on a food system map for the state. So this one, she's been working on this about 2 years, but in the end, it will show all of the food production in our state. Where are the farms? Where are the processors? Where are the distributors? Where are the retailers? Where's food service located? And then food pantries, and then ultimately composting and anaerobic digestion to create a circular food system for the state. We have a food donation toolkit to try to convince more businesses and organizations that it's great to donate food because there is the Good Samaritan Act that provides liability protection, and that there are tax credits that can give you the retail value of that food as a tax credit. So there's an economic reason, and there is a liability coverage protection, which should really work to encourage more food donation. And then we have done with a lot of communities in Maine, try to help them get composting or anaerobic digestion programs so that their residents have a good, easy way to process their food scraps. And we have a lot of data on those as well. So I'm just finishing up, to say to you in terms of next steps that you might think about is how to build food waste education with the audiences that you work with, whether that's communities or whether that's other groups and organizations. How can you help? How can you build your own food waste education? How can you help others learn about it? And so we give these, like I said, our Food Rescue Maine website, our blog, our newsletter, Instagram and TikTok. how can you start tracking and measuring your food waste and cost data? That's an important initiative. And then finally, once you have the better education, once you've got some of the data, what types of solutions, whether it's reduction, recovery, or recycling, make sense for you and your household, your community, or your business. So I think that is really
thank you, Suzanne.
sure.
Hi, I'm Vera with the Maine GP. I don't really have a question, just a comment, and I would like to give a shout out to all the cleaning groups that are out there in Maine who rescue thousands of pounds of food from orchards and farms. Some very generous donors out there. It's a great opportunity to go out there and get that food to people that need it.
Yes, yeah, it's
Yeah,
terrific.
any other questions for Suzanne?
I hope that,
Hi,
Mark,
it's Brittany with the DEP.
Uh-huh.
One of the things I learned about not too long ago was at grocery stores, they talk about how attractive looking fruits and vegetables are, and sometimes they will not accept things simply because this pepper looks ugly. So they won't sell it even though it's perfectly good. Do you know if we have anything in Maine that's working towards rescuing those ugly fruits and vegetables?
yes, I mean, that is a reality. And it's sort of an odd thing. It's a little bit, the grocery stores reject things that don't meet those perfect fruit and vegetable specifications because they feel that the consumer will not. So if they tried to put those on those piles of fruits and vegetables in the grocery store, that those would be the things that wouldn't get selected. And so then they would just end up getting wasted anyway. So it's, it really is an education thing on all fronts, but some of the more positive things that are happening. So when that load might get rejected from the grocery store, I know up in Aroostook County, also down in southern Maine, there are charitable food organizations who are in contact with those truck drivers. They are actually known to the trucking companies as a place that, because usually the trucker doesn't care, they have to go pick up their next load. So they weren't intending to drive away with a full truck of, cantaloupe or peppers or whatever it might be. So they need to get rid of it as quickly as possible so that they can go to their next pickup. So fortunately, one of the main ways that gets saved is that these food recovery organizations, like up in the county with Catholic Charities, and I know Wayside food programs in southern Maine, they are known to those truckers. They have loading docks where trucks can just pull up and offload that. And both Dixie Shaw for Catholic Charities up in the county and Don Morrison at Wayside, they have a network of food pantries. So when they get those big mega deliveries, they have a whole network of food pantries that they can then share that food with. So that's, one, I think for that specific thing that you're talking about, that's one thing that's happening today.
Yes, one more question. I also know that expiration dates are, some people will take them as gospel when really it should be more of a suggestion for some foods. Like, for example, I've had a bag of salad that's 5 days past expiration date and it's perfectly fine. Is that part of education to try and like tell people for certain things like maybe like fish, it's no good, but hey, that lemon's still good 2 days after it's the expiration date.
No, it's an excellent point. And I would say, I mentioned that the whole world is really, many of the developed countries are looking at this issue of food waste. And one of the group that has made the most impact in addressing household or consumer-based food waste is in the UK. And the big initiative was, and I always forget the name, it's something like sniff, smell, taste, but I think that they got those date labels to be removed. And what they are telling people is, remember that your senses can tell you if food is good or not. If it smells bad, if it tastes bad, if it looks bad, that's really the way that we're meant to. And that these date labels And I think the state of California the governor signed that they can no longer use date labeling on food products. So to reduce that confusion, except of course, I think baby formula, there's like 3 categories where for health reasons, and safety reasons, it has to be, but the rest is not necessary. And we are fortunate to have in our congressional delegation, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, who's leading a bipartisan group, because this is again, a social and environmental issue, this food waste. They have been working actually quite a few years on trying to get date labeling legislation passed at the federal level. So they have been happy that California just did this because they feel like that will help spur the work that they've been doing to point out just what you've said, which is that these date labels cause a lot of needless waste, and it gets passed on. Those standards get passed on to the pantry systems as well. And so people who are, coming to the pantries or shopping the pantries or managing the pantries also think, well, it's got these date labels on them, so this food must not be good after the date. So this lack of education, this use of date labels is a problem at every level. Luckily, work is being done here in the States to try to fix it. The more that you can do to share your experience with others. And the proof of it is in the UK, where they took this on as an issue, that's how they were really able to make super progress on getting household food waste reduced.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. That was very interesting.
Sure.